Hello everyone, I am JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the new album from Travis Scott, Astroworld. Now before I get into this review here today, I do want to apologize for how late this video is coming out. Ideally, I would have liked to have this review out about a week ago. However, if you saw my latest update video on the channel I put out a couple weeks ago, you would know that the past couple weeks I've been away on vacation, so I didn't really have a lot of time to listen to a whole bunch of new music and record videos and put them out, so I wasn't able to make this review until I got home. So I do apologize for that, but I did get to it as soon as I got home, and now, of course, I'm recording this review here now. So if you've been following my channel for any period of time, you'd probably notice that when it comes to a lot of the newer hip-hop artists that tend to fall into the trap type of sound, or just the poppier type of sound in general, I typically don't cover much of that here on the channel, mostly because that sound does not really interest me all that much. I don't really care for it a lot, so I don't really go out of my way to review it because I'm just not going to like it most of the time. There's no point of me going out of my way to listen to it just to not like it. However, when I heard Travis Scott's 2015 album, Rodeo, I was pretty impressed by it, even though it did fall into this, that category, that poppier, trappier sort of hip-hop that's rather popular nowadays. I did really like that album, so much so that I may or may not be showing off a CD copy of it in an upcoming update video for my CD and vinyl collection. So make sure you check that out when that comes out. But yeah, I do really like that album. Unfortunately, I was not as impressed with Travis's works before or after that, really. His second studio album I just thought was really boring overall. In fact, there's very little I remember about it outside of the singles. And he also had that collaborative project with Quavo late last year. I didn't check it out until early this year. I didn't review it here on the channel in 2017 just because I didn't figure I'd like it all that much, and I was right. But coming into Astroworld, I did have some high hopes for this thing, considering that it was a bigger break between albums than what Rodeo and his second album had. And because there was a lot of hype surrounding this thing, I was expecting Travis to maybe, deliver here on this project, fix the problems that he, ran into on some of his more recent projects, and deliver a project on par with Rodeo, or at least just a good project overall. And overall, I would say that this is, at least in my own opinion, Travis's second best project, Rodeo still being the first. I definitely think it easily outclasses any other project that he's, put out, album, mixtape, whatever it may be, that's not Rodeo. And while I do think that this is his second best project, and that's certainly, a good thing to some extent, I don't think that this project is all that great either. It's definitely, many steps below Rodeo. Just as much as many steps above his other projects. Overall, I would say I'm just kind of meh on this project. I feel like it's pretty average overall. There are moments on it that I enjoy, but there's also moments on this thing that I just find myself bored or very uninterested. I do feel like the album starts off particularly strong, though. I feel like some of this album's first few tracks are some of its strongest. The first 5 tracks in particular, I feel like are probably the strongest 5-ish or so on the album. The album starts off with Stargazing, which, begins with this more melodic sounding part that I think is a good way to open up the album. I really like this part. And then later on, there is a switch up. I'm not really a big fan of how it switches up. It's just very sudden, and it goes into this other beat. It's just kind of clunky, I feel, even though I do like both parts of the track on their own. I feel like they're both pretty solid through and through, pretty enjoyable. I'm just not a big fan of the switch up all that much on here. I just felt like it was kind of clunky. It kind of feels like it's 2 separate tracks just kind of being mashed together here, but it is still a pretty enjoyable track overall. I think it's a good way to start off the album. And it's immediately followed up by Carousel, which is probably my favorite song on the album. This track features Frank Ocean on it, and I feel like both Travis and Frank are doing a pretty good job here on this song. It's just overall a pretty enjoyable cut in my opinion. Then you have the track Sicko Mode, which is probably my least favorite of all these first 5 tracks on here. I'm just not a big fan of Drake's contributions to this track. He just doesn't sound super interesting. He sounds kind of boring on here. And his lines about, taking half a Xanax and just being out like a light for 13 hours straight on his flight is just kind of laughable, honestly. And he repeats it multiple times in the song, which just makes it even funnier, I feel. I don't know a lot about drugs. I've never used drugs or Xanax, but I have a feeling that this is kind of a funny thing that's worth laughing at, and I'm not sure it was intended to be that way. I do really like Travis's part on this song, however. I feel like he makes up for some of the weakness that Drake brought to the track, and the production on here is also pretty solid through and through. I do also kind of feel like some of the switch-ups in this track are also a little bit sudden, but, you know, at least the individual parts of it that I do like are strong enough that I would say that it's one of the stronger tracks on here in comparison to some of the weaker cuts. Then you have the track R.I.P. Screw, which is, of course, referring to DJ Screw, and this is kind of a tribute of sorts to him. It's a decent track in my opinion, probably one of my other least favorite ones out of these first 5, but I do feel like overall it's a track that grew on me with each listen. I like Sway Lee's contributions, which is, a pretty rare thing for me to say considering I'm not really a big fan of him. But I do like what he added to this track, and Travis himself sounds pretty alright as well. And the production on here was also pretty good. Then you also have the 5th track on here, Stop Trying to Be God, which is just a pretty interesting track overall. Probably one of the most interesting Travis has ever put out. And probably one of the most interesting on the album overall. It has some pretty interesting features on it, including Stevie Wonder on the harmonica, Kid Cudi providing some of his signature kind of humming noises. If you're familiar with Kid Cudi at all, you know what I'm talking about, among other features. It's pretty interesting to see how this track kind of comes together. It has a very sort of laid-back, kind of hypnotizing feel, I guess you could say. It's just very interesting sounding, very different sounding, and I liked it for those reasons. It easily stands out as one of the most memorable and standout moments on the record. While my opinions towards these first 5 tracks are for the most part positive, I would say, varying degrees of positive, but positive nonetheless, after this point the album takes a pretty big nosedive in my opinion. Not necessarily that any of the tracks after this one are so atrociously awful that they just are unlistenable or anything like that, but they're just so boring and uninteresting that I can't help but feel just very, unwilling to move on into this next part of the album whenever I was listening through it. I really liked the first 5 tracks, I thought they were enjoyable, but as soon as I got to track 6, I was like, can I just stop here for the most part? It does pick up again a little bit towards the end, and there are some tracks mixed in this other, the rest of the tracks here that are kind of enjoyable, and I'll talk about those later on. But much of it is just kind of uninteresting for the most part, especially considering how much of these tracks are like 2 to 3 minutes in length. They're not super different in terms of their structure. Lots of times I feel like they're carried, the only thing that's really separating them from one another is who's featured on the track. It's just pretty boring in my opinion. Another problem I have with this album that I kind of alluded to before was that the features kind of carry a lot of the weight of this album. For the most part, they're the most standout part of this project, for better or for worse, really. I just kind of feel like Travis is the least interesting part of his own project, which is never a good thing on your own album. Like I said, there are some good features on here, like Frank Ocean's feature, like all the features on Stop Trying to Be God, like all 4 of them, or however many there was. I also like The Weeknd's features on the tracks he appeared on, particularly on the track Wake Up. I really like this feature there, though I do kind of wish there was less auto-tune on his voice. I felt like that was a bit unnecessary considering he's a pretty great singer as it is, but overall I feel like he easily outshined Travis on that track. It kind of felt more like a Weeknd track featuring Travis even, I'd be willing to say, because I felt like he was so much more memorable on that song. There are also some pretty, underwhelming and not good features on this thing as well. I mentioned Drake earlier, who's not, awful or anything, but was pretty uninteresting to me. You also have 21 Savage on the track NC-17, which he just sounds really boring to me. Like, he's never sounded really interesting to me. Doesn't sound interesting to me here either. And then, before I go into this next one, I do want to say, I do want to bring up the fact that there is a newer version of this album. Originally, the album had several problems with its mixing, and there was clipping problems with the album and mixing problems and all of that. I am reviewing the newer version here in particular. That's the one I'm going to be talking about here in this review, but I have heard the original version with all of its mixing problems in there. And in that version, aside from other problems as well, there's also this really quiet nav feature on the track Yosemite, which is quiet. I guess that's the best way to put it. Like, he's mixed so quietly into the mix that he's difficult do here. It's such a bad blunder on, how could this happen on like a professionally produced album for an artist as big as Travis Scott? How could an error like this happen? Like, did they think that this was like a good artistic decision? Maybe that's why they did it initially, and after the backlash they changed it to sound a bit more normal. Because it doesn't sound good in the original version. The quietness doesn't add anything artistically. It's just really awkward. It sounds like Nav is recording like into his phone or like his Nintendo DS or something. Like, that's what it sounds like, honestly. I believe YouTube still has the original audio in Travis Scott's YouTube channel if you want to listen to it there. I know on Spotify it's updated to be the newer version. At least as of right now, as of when I'm recording this video, I know the YouTube version is quieter. That might not stay that way in the future, but it is a sight to, to behold or listen to, I guess you could say. And I know, like I said, I'm reviewing the newer version of the album, so I'm not really factoring that into my overall thoughts on the album. I just find it really both funny and just bewildering how that ever happened, honestly. It's really surprising. As for Nav's feature on the newer version of the album, it sounds better, as in it's mixed better, but he still sounds very boring overall, so yeah, there's that. Also, a good way into this album towards the end, you get the track Butterfly Effect, which was originally released as a single like over a year ago. I believe it was like in May of 2017. I could be off slightly, but I know it was back in 2017 sometime. The only reason that this track was included on the album, let's be real here, was just for the streaming, just to have those streams that were accumulated on this track count towards this album and its release. How many streams it was going to have when it was released, so the album would have more streams total in its debut week. That's the only reason this track was included on the album, honestly. And the track initially was not super interesting to me. I think it's pretty boring overall, like much of the tracks later on in the album. And yeah, that's all there really is to say about it. It's not a super interesting track. It's just, I don't understand why it was put on this album, considering the album is also pretty lengthy as it is. I mean, in runtime, it's a little under an hour, so not super long by any means, but it feels a lot longer than that because there's 17 tracks. Many of them just happen to be pretty short, but still, especially considering how similar lots of these sound, how uninteresting lots of these sound, I can't help but feel like the album feels a lot longer than it actually is, and I really don't understand why a track like Butterfly Effect needed to be included on here, except for the whole stream aspect of it. I understand why it was included in that regard, but artistically speaking, I don't understand why it was included. It could have easily been, left off the album, and it wouldn't have changed all that much up. In fact, it would have made the album a bit more concise, which is what it really needed to be at the end of the day, I feel. Despite, everything track 6 and on for the most part being pretty uninteresting in my opinion, I also feel like the last couple tracks on here are pretty decent. Houston Fornication is a decent song in my opinion. Nothing all too stand out about it, but it's definitely a bit more interesting than a lot of the tracks that came right before it. And then the closing track, Coffee Bean, is also pretty interesting. It sees Travis getting a bit more lyrical, at least by his own standards. And I like that. It at least makes the track a bit more interesting. It provides another layer of depth to this track that many of the songs on here, especially past track 5, did not have. And yeah, it's a pretty decent closer overall. The last couple of tracks on here, I feel like were pretty decent through and through. And also the track, like I mentioned earlier, Wake Up, that had The Weeknd, I also thought that track was pretty decent in the later parts of this album, I guess you could say. Everything after track 5 is. I know it's not the halfway point in the album or anything like that, but I just kind of classify that as the later part of the album. So overall, Astroworld, like I said, I think this is a pretty average project overall. There are some highlights on here. There are some decent cuts, particularly in the first 5 tracks. There are, all those tracks are enjoyable to some extent, in my opinion. Some more than others. Some are just okay, while others are pretty interesting, I will admit. And there are also some cuts later on as well, like the last couple, that are also, somewhat entertaining. But much of the album was just not very interesting to me. The production on here is also pretty solid. It's pretty interesting as well. Manages to be a bit more than what you would typically expect from your average pop rap or trap rap beat, and that's something that I did like. but it doesn't save a lot of the weaker cuts on here for the most part. And the features on here, there are some great ones, there are some awful ones, and for the most part, they are almost always more interesting than Travis himself, which is pretty unfortunate considering that this is his own album. So yeah, overall I would say this is a pretty, okay project in my opinion. I don't feel like it's one I'm going to return to all that much, but it's not one that I would say I dislike either. It's easily much better than his last album or any of the mixtapes he put out, but it's still nowhere near close to as enjoyable as Rodeo was in my opinion. It's average. But yeah, that is just my own personal opinion on this project. Feel free to have your own, whether it be that you like this project a lot more than I did, or if you liked it a lot less than I did. In fact, feel free to leave your own opinion in the comment section down below. I really appreciate seeing it. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, more album reviews, more countdown lists, track reviews, discussion videos, things of that sort. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure you subscribe. And once again, I do want to apologize for having this video out as late as I did. Like I said, I would have liked to have this out a week ago, but that did not happen. You're getting it now, pretty much, whenever you're watching this. So yeah, with that said, that is just my own thoughts on this project. Thanks for watching, guys, and stay golden.